I'm John Burnham Schwartz, Literary Director of the Sun Valley Writers Conference, and this is Beyond the Page. We were already editing this episode when the LA fires broke out on January 7th, 2025. In fact, our editor, Dean Grinsfelder, had to evacuate as the flames moved in. So did my 91-year-old dad. And so did my co-producer, James Tooley's parents and brothers and their families. One of those brothers saw his house burn to the ground. All of which is to say, I guess, that podcasts, though they live in the ether, don't exist in a vacuum, and neither do we. We're all connected. And so, while those impacted by the LA fires regroup and recover, we want to share an important story, recorded live at the 2024 Writers' Conference, about another eerily similar and catastrophic fire that was the centerpiece of journalist John Vaillant's award-winning book, Fire Weather.
So this presentation contains adult themes, and I wish they were the themes that are probably swirling through your mind right now and maybe all day long. These are the adult themes of fires coming into our communities in ways that we have no power to respond to. And it's terrifying. And how I manage my fear is by going into it. I spent 7 years researching fire weather because it's clear to me that climate disruption, of which fire is just one manifestation, is the issue of our time. It's an atmospheric issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a political issue, it's an energy issue, it's an infrastructure issue, it's a social justice issue. Climate disruption will impact every aspect of our lives for the rest of our lives. If there was ever any doubt that this was so, last summer settled it. According to NASA, 2023 was the hottest year on record. But that's a historical point of view, and we're concerned here with the future, with our future, with Sun Valley's future. And looked at in this way, 2023 will prove to be one of the coolest years on record for the rest of this century. Already things feel different. Weather is different. Fire is different. The Earth's expressions are intensifying and accelerating. Atmospheric carbon dioxide is increasing at a pace about 100 times faster than in pre-industrial times. So 7 years in a room, you have a lot of time to think about things and to count things. And I made the mistake of counting how many human fires there are, man-made fires, human-made fires, anthropogenic fires. We make, collectively, trillions of fires every day. And that's not just every pilot light. It's not just every war weapon. It's not just every forest clearing fire or cook fire. It's also every explosion in an internal combustion engine. I drove 13 hours from Vancouver, BC to get here, and every minute that Subaru generated 10,000 combustions, 10,000 individual explosions of heat, fire, light, energy, and emissions. And there are a couple of billion internal combustion engines doing just that every day, all around the world. So, in a sense, one way to think about it is we have created galaxies of fire across the globe. We're extraordinary, and this is one of the fruits of our labors, and there are liabilities. Almost a century ago, Ernest Hemingway published his novel, The Sun Also Rises, and there are a couple of lines in it that have been on my mind lately. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said. Gradually, and then suddenly. So this applies equally well to the last 50 years of observed and tracked climatic changes. We know the air is getting hotter because we can feel it. Radical extremes are being felt all over the world. Look at any metric of planetary distress. You can look at ice loss, you can look at sea surface temperature, you can look at air temperature. It doesn't really matter. We're redlining across the board. There's language we need to learn for the future, which is already upon us. Alex Steffen is a futurist working out of Berkeley, California. A discontinuity is an event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide for future problem solving. And discontinuities are being encountered by us by people trying to keep us safe more and more often. What we're entering here is clima incognita, the unknown climate. We're going into uncharted territory, and there are dragons there. There are beasts there. Thomas Smith, an environmental geographer at the London School of Economics, summed it up this way. He said, "I'm not aware of a similar period when all parts of the climate system were in record-breaking or abnormal territory. It's an extraordinary, epochal moment we find ourselves in. Never before have technology, culture, and nature been moving so quickly simultaneously." And one reason it's so shocking is because we're used to being the stars of the show. The Earth has been a stage for us, and we've performed on it. Historically, it's been humans who've outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to AI, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time, leaving indelible marks as we go. But now, geologic time, climate time, atmosphere, and ocean time are moving as fast, in some cases faster than we are, faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. I began to understand the implications of this acceleration when Fort McMurray caught on fire in May 2016. Fort McMurray, Alberta, it turns out, is an instructive place to try to make sense of these rapid changes. It's also a good place to learn about fire, petroleum, and how they fuel the volatile and all-consuming appetites of petrocapitalism. So Fort McMurray, for those of you who don't know, is 1,200 miles due north of our current position. It's in the middle of the boreal forest, which is the largest forest system in the world. And what they do up in Fort McMurray is extract petroleum, but not in a way that any of us would recognize. It's not liquid. It is bituminous sand. It's a tar-clotted sand that they dig out with enormous shovels or melt out with massive quantities of natural gas. And once they've rendered this, they have to boil it down again, get the sand out of it, and then all you have still is tar. All you have is, essentially a driveway sealer. So then you have to crack those very stubborn long-chain hydrocarbons into something that a southern refinery, an American refinery, can recognize, because that's where all that stuff goes. Fort McMurray, by itself, is the largest foreign supplier of petroleum to the United States. It's running about 4 million barrels a day. And in order to do that, it has despoiled 1,000 square miles of otherwise pristine forest. And within that are a couple hundred square miles of tailings ponds filled with toxic effluent. And it's the largest, most destructive petroleum recovery project anywhere on Earth. And I wanted to see how high you could go and still spot it, because it's enormous. Well, you can go 6,000 miles up into space, into the exosphere. And if you know what you're looking for, you can still see the strip mines of Fort McMurray. So a term that all of us need to know, especially here in Sun Valley, is the WUI, the wildland-urban interface. And that is where the wildland, grasslands, forests meet the built environment. And that's how fires tend to enter these communities. 2016 is when such a fire entered the community of Fort McMurray. So you don't want to see one of these outside of your town. This is May 2nd, 2016. This photo is taken by a firefighter from Fire Hall 5, about 5 miles south of downtown Fort McMurray, population roughly 90,000 people. And back then, in the innocent days of May 2nd, it looked like, well, there's a wildfire out in the forest, and that's where fires stay generally. They don't come into town. That was going to change in a surprising fashion, and the best way to illustrate this is through the eyes of Chandra Linder, one of the people I interviewed. And so I'm going to read a short section from the book right now. In Fort McMurray, May 3rd, day after, began differently for everyone, but it ended the same. For Chandra Linder, it began with a rite of spring. Linder was a labor relations advisor who worked for Syncrude. Linder's one of the synthetic crude oil companies up there. Again, it's not actual crude oil. You have to render this tarry substance with huge amounts of natural gas in order to turn it into something that a foreign refinery can recognize. Linda's husband, Corey's an engineer. He was employed there too, and so were many of their friends. Blonde with a pixie cut, Linda's fit and warm and does not suffer fools. It makes sense once you get to know her, but to an outsider, it might be surprising to see someone so polished and female in such a remote, industry-oriented, testosterone-heavy place. So the ratio of men to women working up there is about 25-1. For work, Linda dresses accordingly, minimal makeup, high collars, dark pants, no heels, clothes suitable for climbing in and out of trucks and SUVs, for working in a world of working men. Linda had already seen the smoke plume southwest of town because everyone had seen it. A windswept cauliflower of billowing grays and browns that appeared to have sprouted full-blown from the forest on Sunday afternoon. It had been growing since then, but it was still miles away, and it wasn't the only one. Over the weekend, the Linders had hosted friends evacuated due to another fire. It was almost a lark. They took photos of the big plume developing across the river the same way one would a sunset or a rainbow. Their friends went home the next day. Already, as recent as it was, 2016 feels like a more innocent time. Because forestry was on it. Boots were on the ground, water bombers were in the air. As far as the Linders were concerned, whatever was out there was being handled because that's what people do in Fort McMurray. They handle things. Certainly, the beginning of May was a little early for fires. There were still car-sized blocks of winter ice on the riverbanks, and some local lakes had yet to thaw, but otherwise this was nothing new. Fires cloud the horizon every spring and summer up there. As Chandra and Corey Linder said, practically in chorus, it happens every year. So given the unseasonable heat and the fact that 5 separate wildfires had ignited around the city that weekend, it's hard to overstate how unconcerned was Fort McMurray's citizenry. There was a national census done of Canada in 2016, and that year in Fort McMurray, the median household income was $200,000 a year. It's one of the wealthiest municipalities in North America. But winters are long and dark in Fort McMurray, but this one was over, spring was here, and Linder felt as beautiful and as hopeful as the day. So we're going to jump ahead now about 4 hours. We're still May 3rd, still with Chandra. Still feeling the symptoms of spring fever, Chandra knocked off work at lunch and organized herself for a 2 o'clock meeting at Syncrude's downtown office in the Borealis building. With no traffic, it's a 30-minute drive down the highway. Still 10 miles north of downtown, she was rounding a long, gradual bend in the river when her windshield filled with something she did not recognize. When I got that first view of it, said Linder, I went, hang on a second. It was clear overhead, but to the south, it was black. Black smoke with streaks of red in it. It took up the whole sky. I'm trying to make sense of this thing. I'm thinking maybe it just looks closer than it is. I'm thinking maybe the red is the sun shining through smoke. But it's not the sun. It's in the wrong place. And then I realize it's flame. Linder had seen a lot of fire plumes, but this didn't look like any of them. So I pull over to the side of the highway and I call my guy Byron and I say, are we having this meeting? And he's like, no, we are not having this meeting. Don't come in. And I'm like, I'm looking at a wall of flames here. It was a short call, in part because no one was quite sure what to say next. What do you say on a beautiful spring day when the city where you live and conduct business appears to be on fire? After hanging up, Linda continued on to her exit where she turned west, back up the hill and out of the river valley. Okay, she said, not right, but here's what I do. I'm gonna go home anyway. I drive past the dry cleaners. Well, I'm gonna drop off my stuff at Sam's place because in my mind, the fire's still on the other side of the river, downtown. So I'm dropping my stuff off and this guy comes in from the golf course in full golf apparel and he's like, holy shit, we just got evacuated from the golf course. And I'm like, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here to pick up my dry cleaning. And I said, well, what golf course were you on? because we have two in town. And he says, thick wood, meaning the fire has just jumped the river. The Athabasca River, by the Thickwood Golf Course, is 1/3 of a mile wide. So, continued Linder, Sam the dry cleaner, who's our buddy, is on the phone to his wife. Honey, it just jumped the river. Get out, get out, get out. In all this craziness, Sam still takes my dry cleaning, logs it, and he's like, Tuesday good? And I'm like, yeah, next Tuesday's great. At 2:00 in the afternoon, on May 3rd, Linder tucked her laundry ticket safely in her wallet and aimed the Porsche for home. So that was 2:00. It's 2:45, gradually, and then suddenly. I've been doing this for years, and it still chokes me up to think about them because I talk to all of them. This fellow, Paul Earst, he's the last one out of his neighborhood. You can see the fire reflected on the hood of his truck, and there are fireballs rolling over the road. And so how fireballs work is something to know about fire is fire doesn't burn the object. It heats the object up until it starts to off-gas hydrocarbons. That's what the fire interacts with. It interacts with the gas. So these spruce trees and eventually the houses are like gas cans full of vapor. And that's why you have these, they call them dragons, these billowing plumes that soar hundreds of feet above the trees that roll across the road. And I asked Paul, did you happen to notice the thermometer in your truck? What did it say? And he said, I did notice it. And he said, it said 151 degrees. And a deer on fire ran into his truck. There's no way to get out. His wife and kids are right there. All the cell phones are jammed. There's nothing he can do except sit there because it's bumper-to-bumper traffic because everybody is trying to leave. Fort McMurray on May 3rd, 2016 was the site of the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times. So something to know about these temperatures, the other sciencey bit is radiant heat is the heat that coming off the candle that tells you not to touch it. And radiant heat moves at the speed of light. And the radiant heat coming out of the basically 5-mile wide fire front that was blowing into Fort McMurray was about 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit, moving at the speed of light, desiccating everything, priming everything. And as it heats it up, again, this is what the heat is for. Fire is hot because that's what makes the hydrocarbons release from the flammables. Doesn't matter if it's a plastic chair or your polyester jacket or an oak tree. The heat releases the hydrocarbons, turns them into vapor, and then when the fire gets there, when the embers get there, they have very little work to do. They can just ignite. So I talked to firefighters, many of them, and one of them said to me, you know, the houses were burning down in 5 minutes. And I thought, you know, adrenaline, talking to a journalist, exaggeration. It was a hectic moment for sure. And I talked to more firefighters in other parts of the city, and they said 6 minutes, 3 minutes. I talked to a structure fire physicist, and he said, yeah, if you want to understand how that works, look at the Hamburg firestorm of 1943 when the Allies carpet bombed Hamburg, Germany. When things get hot enough, entire $750,000 two-story houses will burn from the roof to the basement in 5 minutes because a surprising number of hydrocarbons make up the modern house, from vinyl siding to vinyl windows to what your mattress is made out of to tar shingles. All that stuff at 1,100 Fahrenheit is off-gassing like crazy. And when the fire gets there, the house doesn't catch on fire, it bursts into flame. That's the modern home. I talked to firefighters, and these are competitive type A guys. You know, they're people you definitely want to have on your side when things go wrong. And they are team players who like to win. And it's hard for them to say what they said to me, but more than one said to me, we got our ass handed to us. And that's a really hard thing to say no matter what your job is. It's really hard to get your ass handed to you and to watch your own house burn, to watch your whole neighborhood burn, to not be able to protect the thing, to your family's things, your neighbor's things. to run away. They had to run away. They sound the Mayday, three-horn blast, and they booked it out of those developments, most of which have only one road in, which is something to think about if you're into residential development. This is something that fire does. Only a firefighter could have taken this. This is a fire hose, super powerful instrument. You know, if we turned it on you, it would blow you out of your chairs and send you out the door. Very powerful thing. You can see up there where it turns gray by the rooftop, see it bending. See it bending and then vaporizing. There is so much energy in that neighborhood that's already on fire. This, by the way, is day 3 of the Fort McMurray fire. It's about 3 in the morning. We notice it around here. Things don't cool down the way they used to, and fire loves that. Fire can spread now at night in ways that it didn't used to be able to. So what's happening there is the fire has so much energy that it is actually bending the fire hose stream, vaporizing it, and shooting it up into the fire column, which is now 45,000 feet tall. It's a pyrocumulonimbus fire system. They move kind of like hurricanes do. They generate their own lightning. They generate their own wind. And the next time you're going to see that fire hose water is after it gets up to about 30,000 feet in the fire column, it's going to mix with the ash of the burning trees and the burning homes, turn into black hail and come back down. And if you know your Bible, you read about that in Exodus. That happened in Fort McMurray. So they had to get creative. The water wasn't working. So they had to tear fire breaks through the neighborhoods. This neighborhood of Prospect was a year old. These were beautiful, smart homes, top of the line if you're a wealthy, upper middle class oil worker making $200,000 a year. And they tore these things down, and I interviewed these guys who did that terrible work. And it was surreal for them. One of the weirder, more amazing interviews I've done. So people are fleeing, largest evacuation in modern times. Although it had been dark since the early afternoon because of the smoke, night had truly fallen now. From the air, the city was shrouded in smoke, mottled with orange, a blemish on the atmosphere as lurid as a bruise. It was impossible to know what was going on down below, how much of the city was gone, how much was at risk, what would be left in the morning. The city was effectively empty, a first in its 150-year history, and civilian life had ceased. Homes, shops, offices and schools, churches and restaurants, Showgirls nightclub, the Heritage Museum, the Boomtown Casino. In one single frantic afternoon, everyone had dropped what they were doing and made for the door. Left behind were still life tableaus of lives interrupted, much like those discovered in the abandoned city of Pripyat following the meltdown of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. In both communities, there were those who understood how truly grave things were, but many others had left under the wishful impression that they would be gone for only a day or two. Surely firefighters would get the situation in hand by then. So Fort McMurray joined New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina as being the kind of largest, most disinhabited city. No one was allowed back into Fort McMurray for more than a month. So all night, this night here, May 3rd, trucks and crews roamed the ghostly smoke-bound city, lights flashing but otherwise unannounced, save for the growl and whine of their engines and heavy tires. With no traffic and no one left to warn, there was no need for sirens anymore. Besides, what was the hurry? Visibility was at best a block, often far less, and speeding under those conditions is dangerous. Night was hard to distinguish from day, and as exhaustion and sleep deprivation took their toll, time and events began to blur inside the disorienting miasm. Meanwhile, the fire, this invading energy, had commandeered not just the physical laws of the land, but the bylaws of the city. Traffic signals with their bright colors and civic rhythms, stop, go, walk, don't walk, seemed in the stultifying gloom to be relics of another civilization. Nothing moved on the streets now. Even the ravens had fled. The firefighters, police officers, heavy equipment operators, and water truck drivers who remained behind in this murky, post-human limbo had seen the movies, and they recognized this place. They called it Zombieland. So in 2016, this was still an exotic, terrible sight. We've seen way more of this now. We've seen Lahaina, we've seen Paradise, we've seen Boulder, Colorado, we've seen Lahaina, Chile, and many other places. But when you're coming home to that, it does something to your heart and your soul that doesn't go away. This is another kind of ruin. So long before we split the atom, we were tampering with the wizard's book of spells. We wanted fire's fierce energy in a bottle, a barrel, a pipeline, and we got it. Energy to burn, to power the world, and generate wealth beyond our wildest dreams. This is from 1962, the year I was born. Some of you may remember Life magazine, a really wonderful weekly that was on many people's coffee tables. So Humble Oil, a subsidiary of Esso, Exxon, back then it was a virtue to be able to melt glaciers. Each day, Humble supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. And what a beautiful, mad, innocent time that was. And a lot of us were around for that. You know, oil was a good thing. It's done so much for us. It enabled all of us to be here together today. I'm really grateful for that. And yeah. But as big oil supercharges our economy and its own bottom line with record profits, it's also supercharging our atmosphere with record quantities of greenhouse gas. CO2 levels now are about 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. By 1960, you see Edward Teller talk at Columbia University. That was Edward Teller, Dr. Strangelove, father of the hydrogen bomb. He got together at a symposium of oil executives, historians, and bankers. And he schooled them on what CO2 does to the atmosphere and on its heat-retaining capabilities. And he described to them a scenario in which the glaciers could melt and could flood coastal cities. This was in 1959. So climate science really ain't rocket science. All you really need is a thermometer and a calendar. In 1982, Exxon distributed this internal memo, partly because of Edward Teller, partly because science was identifying CO2 as a real issue and a threat. Exxon, the biggest company in the world then, wealthiest company, hired excellent scientists to predict, to game out what would happen in the future if we continued to expand our use of fossil fuels. That fat horizontal arrow is what natural fluctuation would look like if we just had a stable climate. That arrow that heads up into the corner there is what they predicted would happen. This is late 1970s science. What they predicted would happen to the climate if we continue to expand fossil fuel use as we are doing. And look where it goes. You can see the temperature, the average temperature, 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees. So this is a new world, and Exxon is part of it. Our appetites are part of it. Basically, fire tornadoes are the fentanyl of fire behavior. So this presents a quandary. How do you separate oil from fire or burning from emissions? You can't. And so shortly after distributing this graph, the petroleum industry, along with its allies in government, in church, in finance, in the media, embarked on a disinformation campaign that continues to this day, disavowing their own excellent predictive science. And we're still dealing with that now. And when we vote, when we invest, what we're investing in are these scenarios. It took me 7 years to figure this out, but this is where we're at. The petroleum industry is a wholly owned subsidiary of fire. Up in Fort McMurray, they're expanding bitumen production. There have been 4 major evacuations in Fort McMurray and its oil sands sites this summer alone. And they're still going. They're still doing it. This is something we need to understand. Again, Alex Steffen from Berkeley, predatory delay. The deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others, whose costs will be paid by us, whose costs could be paid by this beautiful festival that may be harder and harder to host here. So this is a word, I'm going to leave you with this. This is reverescence. Reverescence is regreening and regrowing. It's what happens after wildfires. If you look at that site where the fire tornado was, it's green now. People have rebuilt their houses, the ones who survived. People want to live there. It's a beautiful place. It's a restorable place. An insurance adjuster took this about a month after the Fort McMurray fire. Again, those houses burning down in 5 minutes, and the heat inside the basement so hot that even porcelain toilets were evaporating, like they literally couldn't find them. But somebody planted tulips there. They had no idea what was coming. Those bulbs were 5 inches under the ground. It was apocalyptically hot on the surface for days and weeks. Eventually it cooled down, and those bulbs, they can feel it. It's time. And they burst through all that. And it's extraordinary, the power of nature. And nature is inviting us, is informing us, is urging us to pay attention to its discomfort, to the fever that we're giving it. And also reminding us that this is what it's capable of. This is how it can come back. And that gives me enormous hope. And we are, believe it or not, in the middle of an energy transition now. You wouldn't know that in Alberta. But all over the world, renewable energy is being laid on by the gigawatt in profound ways that are really moving the way we think of energy and really impacting our CO2. On that hopeful note, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Page. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating or review. A good one, we hope. To catch all the latest from the Sun Valley Writers Conference, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to listen to this conversation in its entirety, or to any of our other talks, you can find them at svwc.com. I'm John Burnham Schwartz. Until next time.